Okay, you're good. You're on, we're recording this.
All right. Well, can you maybe move it to share screen? Thanks. Good morning and welcome, everybody. It's a treat to have you here with us as we begin our webinar on the holistic approach to socially responsible investing. This day, Frank, if you'll move to the next slide. We'll begin with everybody in listen-only mode until we hit our question and answer section, except for our speakers, of course. We will be recording this webinar, and the slides will be available and posted after the webinar. And just to begin us with a reflection from the Hasidic tradition as we enter into this webinar on socially responsible investing. This one is from a collection put together by Martin Buber, and it's a tale about Nahum of Stepanishti. On one of the days of Hanukkah, Rabbi Nahum, the son of the rabbi of Rizin, entered the house of study at a time when he was not expected, and found his disciples playing checkers, as was the custom on those days. When they saw the Zadik, they were embarrassed and stopped playing. But he gave them a kindly nod and asked, "Do you know the rules of the game of checkers?" And when they did not reply for shyness, he himself gave the answer. "I shall tell you the rules of the game of checkers. The first is that one must not make two moves at once. The second is that one may only move forward and not backward. And the third, one has reached the last row, one may move to where he likes." These pithy kinds of sayings that come from the Hasidic tradition often point great truths to us. And I think this one in a certain way points us toward kind of an embrace of a deeper understanding of what socially responsible investing is when it has a number of interpretations in a variety of different settings. But this one is about the kind of progress that is made in that understanding and the kind of progress then that is also made in our world as a consequence. We'll move on to the next slide, Frank. We are today with two beloved companions, two folks who are both members of ICCR. We'll give a little bit more on their background later, but we have with us Anita Green of Wespath and Susan Smith Makos of Mercy Investment Services. Frank, if we'll move forward one more. Just talking in terms of where we're hoping to go a little bit today. This webinar is born of the fact that as members of SGI, we're focused on active ownership. For us, that means, for instance, corporate engagements. It means proxy voting. It means shareholder resolutions. It means advocating for public policy. And as members, we've tried to embrace a more holistic view of socially responsible investing. Socially responsible investing is simply the thou shalt nots, a negative screen. We believe it means much more, especially in that capacity as active owners. And so we have them with us today, two ICCR members, to describe how they approach socially responsible investing. We believe that this is a timely webinar for us, as we have worked with some members recently to update and review their policies. And we know that other members are also kind of reevaluating and reconsidering and revising their policies. In a broader context in the US and globally, socially responsible investing is being recognized by large and ESG is now considered a material factor. And overall, globally, the awareness of what these efforts are about is growing. So our first presenter then is Anita Green. She's the Director of Sustainable Investment Services for Wespath Benefits and Investments. She is responsible for strategic development and implementation of Wespath's corporate engagement program. And in this role, she regularly communicates with corporate executives about environmental, social, and governance performance. And she currently serves with Frank on the board of directors for the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. Why don't I pass it on to you, Anita, to lead us through your slides.
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to talk about Wespath's Sustainable Investing Program with you today. As Chris said, my name is Anita Green, and I direct the Sustainable Investment Services team here at Wespath. So if we go to the next slide, I just would like to set up for you that the United Methodist Church, which is our institution, gives us some pretty clear direction on what we are to do with our investments. First of all, from the Book of Discipline, it tells us that we are to act as a fiduciary solely in the interests of participants and beneficiaries, but it also tells us that we are to make a conscious effort to invest with the goals outlined in the social principles. Now, here at Wespath, we do manage plan assets through our Wespath Benefits and Investments parent company, and that manages participant money for around 100,000 clergy and lay employees associated with the United Methodist Church. But we have a subsidiary, Wespath Institutional Investments, that also manages United Methodist related institutional clients. So if we go to the next slide, with the Book of Discipline as the overall frame, we have also developed a set of investment beliefs that help guide our sustainable investment program. Now, these are public, they're on our website, but I'd like to just share a few of the sub-points with you today to kind of help set the stage. So some of the things that are found in the investment beliefs would be, our investment decisions and activities must support the financial well-being of our participants and mission of our institutional investors. We have an obligation to cooperate with other like-minded investors to mitigate systemic financial risk. The intentional integration of environment, social, and governance, or you'll hear me call that ESG, for environment, social, and governance factors, in the selection and management of investments positively affects long-term performance. And a rigorous due diligence process ensures that we select external asset managers that align with our investments and beliefs. So going to the next slide, we're going to move down just a little bit deeper into the program, and this is how we operationalize the investment beliefs. And we do that through three pillars: avoid, engage, and invest. Today's discussion is not going to focus on engage. So let me just quickly say that this strategy includes our proxy voting, which we disclose on our website because transparency is something else that we do aspire to whenever possible. It also includes our engagement with corporations on ESG issues in support of long-term value. And when necessary, we will also engage with public policymakers on issues related to shareholder value or shareholder rights. I'm going to spend most of my time today on the invest pillar, and that includes our manager due diligence processes and some investments that we make in pursuit of financial, social, and environmental performance. So before I do that, I'd like to start with a brief discussion of the avoid pillar. And this is the things that we do not invest in. So we have certain ethical exclusions. You'll see the pictures there on the slide: gambling, alcohol, tobacco, weapons, pornography, and private prisons. And those are things that we do not invest in accordance with longstanding United Methodist values. But there are also a few exclusions related to financial risks that are connected to sustainability issues. That being specifically coal or thermal coal that's used to make electricity, and human rights. Now, I'm glad that Chris mentioned the thou shalt nots, because I would like to spend just a second to talk about this myth that if you are screening, you are automatically giving up performance. This has been around for a very long time, and at Wespath, our official position is that our investment screens neither help nor hurt performance. We think that they are neutral. And if you go to the next slide, I can show you how we track this pretty carefully. This slide shows three advisors: Northern Trust, BlackRock, and BlackRock. And the gray bar will indicate the index that they manage for us. So there are three different indexes here. And then the bottom line, the third line, is the difference in our portfolio compared to the unscreened benchmark. So if you look at the blue ovals, you'll see that's the percentage difference. So roughly 2.3% of the Russell 1000 value is excluded due to our ethical exclusions. And so, and on down the line. So anywhere between 2 and 4% of the index is excluded for ethical reasons. Now, if you look at the blue rectangle, that will show you the difference in performance over the 1, 5, and 10-year periods for all three of these various indexes. And what I'd like for you to notice is that all of those numbers start with 0 point. So, our position is that it neither helps nor hurt performance, and we track that very carefully, and I think you'll see that here in this slide. So what I would like to impart upon you with this point is pretty simple. It's simply that screening does not automatically mean you're giving up performance. So if you hear that from someone, I would encourage you to push back on that a little bit. All right, so let's move on to the invest pillar. And this is where we do our ESG integration. And as I read before, we believe that the intentional integration of ESG factors in our investments positively affects our long-term performance. And this starts with our RFP when we're trying to hire a new manager. About 95% of our assets are managed externally by external managers, and so we'll start with an RFP. And then also this evaluation extends into our annual manager evaluations. And this is what I'd really like to chat with you about today. So we began this around 10 years ago, but our early efforts were really quite basic. Over time, we have managed to enhance this process with kind of three big objectives in mind. One, to embed ESG integration at the very start of the investment chain. So we think that that's a great place to start, get that basis set so that we can move on from there. Number two, emphasize our focus on ESG and long-term value creation. Again, the better that we can get managers who align with us on this, the more successful we think we will be. And three, communicate very clearly that ESG integration is a core element in Wespath's overall manager assessment, and also clearly communicate the criteria that we use to evaluate the managers. So let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to walk through our manager evaluation process. I'm not going to focus on the RFP. I mean, that's a pretty straightforward process, but the manager evaluation is something that we've spent a lot of time developing. And so just to give you a high level, the process starts with the annual questionnaire. So each year our managers will get a questionnaire where we ask them various questions around the firm level questions around have you had any changes in personnel, down to performance questions, etc. So this is just standard due diligence. But we've incorporated some ESG questions into this questionnaire. We started this process with our equity managers. We felt like that was kind of the natural first step. But as we have enhanced this over time, we're now sending these ESG questionnaires to additional managers. So we're now trying to get them incorporated across all asset classes. Now, we also discovered that we needed to develop a guidance document to help them understand how to answer the questions. So the manager may not have understood exactly what we were looking for. We provide some examples to help illustrate the answers. So we found that that was helpful just to make sure that we were getting the kind of information back that we really needed. And then step 3 is the questionnaires will come back. We will then read through them and give each manager an individual assessment. And then we will put all of those together into a performance snapshot. And I'm going to share with you what that looks like so that we can assess these managers side by side. So if we go to the next page, I'm going to start here very quickly and give you a sense of what questions we ask the managers, because I feel like that might be helpful for you to know. So here are some sample questions, and many of these can also be translated into an RFP pretty easily. But we've learned that it's important to ask some questions at the firm level, but we also need to ask some questions at the strategy level. And this gives us a clearer picture of where our mandate sits within the firm. So does the firm overall support ESG integration, and do they have the resources to develop that? Or is this merely just kind of a carve-out mandate that they're offering for some of their clients? And that may be perfectly fine, but we just need to know that going in because it helps us understand what we can expect from the manager. And we've discovered that if we only used one set of these kind of questions, we would miss some important information. So we do blend both of them together. And we've also learned that some firms think that ESG integration is screening. So we've had some responses that have said, sustainable investment? Oh, sure, we can screen for you. And that wasn't exactly the answer we were looking for. So by giving these specific questions, it does help kind of tease out a little more information that will help us understand. And, to be fair, in other cases, a manager may not be using the language of ESG, but when we actually dive in and talk more about how they're doing it, they really are addressing many of the ESG trends that can impact specific sectors and industries. So that's why having these questions, again, it will help us get information that we otherwise may not miss. So these questions, the answers come in, they are analyzed and put together in this performance snapshot, or heat map, if you will. So to create this heat map, we'll take all the responses and then we will weight them based upon what we think are more important to our investment program. And then we'll also make some adjustments so that an active manager is weighted appropriately against a passive manager. That way we're trying to level the playing field. And then when the managers come in, we'll share this with them. Now their name will be revealed, but every other manager's name is concealed. And we have found that this is actually a very effective way to provide feedback to the managers. Investment managers are very competitive, and their question when they look at this immediately is, are we number one? And if not, what do we need to do to be number one? So we're able to use this to really kind of frame some substantive discussions with the managers about our expectations related to ESG, what they're doing that is helping us, places where perhaps we have misalignment, and is that our expectation or is that on their performance? So we have really nice conversations around this. And we found that although we didn't expect it going in, this is one of the factors we use in evaluating managers. So I want to be clear that we do not hire or fire managers based solely on their ESG performance, but it's one of several factors that we consider. And last year we had something kind of interesting happen, and that is that we wanted to trim the number of managers we were using. And there were 4 that were underperforming, and our investment team decided to release those managers. And as it turns out, all 4 of them were among the lower performing ESG managers. So again, that wasn't the way we planned this going in, but it does kind of help anecdotally reinforce the investment thesis that this does help support long-term value creation. So this is a lot of work, to do this, and I don't want to scare you. We did put a lot of time and effort into this, but for us, this made more sense than some of the other products that are out there in the market to help you evaluate your managers. So going on to the next slide, and I think I've already kind of touched upon this, so I'll just hit this very quickly. How do we use this information? It enhances our evaluation of the manager's performance. It does help us understand them better, and it helps them understand our expectations better. It really helps us zero in and provide very tailored feedback to the managers. And again, it helps us feel like we're more of a partner with the manager that's managing our assets for us. And then there's a kind of a public component to this, and we do share this information because we want other investors to use it. We want other investors to be thinking about it. So we try to share our knowledge in a way to help drive the market. So now if we could just switch gears a little bit, although our manager ESG program is something we do spend a lot of time on, there's another thing under the invest pillar I'd like to point out for you today, and that's our positive social purpose lending program. And as I mentioned, this is where we try to invest specifically for financial, environmental, or social performance. And this is primarily our affordable housing program. And this is the only portion that we manage in-house. So this is an in-house managed program. And we help provide funding for affordable housing and community development in disadvantaged areas. Now, to be clear, we are not providing direct investment. There are third-party intermediaries who are local, who put the deal together. And what we're doing is we're purchasing a participation in a market rate loan. So for us, this is all done at market rate. And many of the properties that we help fund serve very specific populations, such as the elderly, formerly incarcerated or homeless that are transitioning into more stable situations, deaf persons, Native Americans, etc. And many of the properties will also connect the residents to social services, mental health counseling, substance abuse counseling, job training services, etc. So again, we're trying not just to put some money into affordable housing, but we're really trying to help provide the services that will help these people be successful in their lives. And since the inception of this program, you see the numbers here, we've helped fund about 52,000 units of affordable housing, create more than around 65,000 jobs. And then there is a portion of this that's also microfinance. We don't do a lot of microfinance, but since we started this in 1990, we have invested about 83 million in microfinance, much of that in sub-Saharan Africa. And then just again to finalize here on the performance of this. So this PSP lending program that I mentioned to you, if we go to the next slide, this is within our fixed income funds. So it's a strategy within the fixed income fund. And what you'll see here, the dark blue bar is the performance of our PSP program, and then the light blue bar is the benchmark. And so what you can see here is that this strategy has outperformed its benchmark over the last 10 years. So it's really one of the top performing strategies in our fixed income fund. So we're very happy to be able to take the assets that are in our care, use them to help improve lives, but yet also uphold the fiduciary duty that we have to our participants and our institutional clients. So with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Chris. I look forward to your questions in the Q&A session.
There, thank you, Frank. And Anita, thank you for that presentation. That was really great. I hope and the work involved, it didn't scare our folks, but maybe they'll also have some good questions later after we hear from Susan Smith Makos. So Susan will be speaking next. She joined Mercy Investment Services as their Director of Social Responsibility in November of 2008, became Vice President of Social Responsibility in June 2011. So she has more than 15 years of experience in shareholder advocacy and socially responsible investing. Susan served in a variety of leadership roles in more than 20 years with Bon Secure's Mercy Health, formerly Catholic Health Partners. And it's a health system based in Cincinnati, Ohio. She served as a board member of ICCR from 2008 to 2014 and was chair from 2010 to 2012. She also served on the board of a Wisconsin-based health system from 2004 to 16. She earned her undergraduate degree from Kenyon College in mathematics and Spanish, not necessarily the most immediate pairing of majors, and then went on and earned a Juris Doctor, a law degree, from Indiana University, and is licensed to practice law in Ohio. So with that, I will pass it on to Susan Smith Makos to lead us through Mercy Investment Services approach.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate the introduction. So why don't I kick it off? Let's go to the next slide. And let me tell you a bit about Mercy Investment Services. We are the combined asset management program for the Sisters of Mercy here in the United States, Central and South America, and the Philippines. And we invest the funds on behalf of those Sisters of Mercy, as well as 46 of their sponsored ministries, such as foundations, colleges, high schools, and social service ministries. You see on the bottom of the slide, our mission is to enhance the financial resources of the Sisters of Mercy through socially responsible investing. And we do that guided by a set of critical concerns of the Sisters of Mercy that are on the next slide. And I would venture to say that as you look at these critical concerns, probably all of us on this phone share these same set of concerns together. And that's, there's much alignment between all of us on our focus. But for the Sisters of Mercy, care of the earth, a particular focus on immigrants and care for our brothers and sisters, racism, and particularly the impact that racism has institutionalized through our society today, a special focus on women and children, and then finally violence through, whether it is through weapons or guns, or in particular looking at violence in society today, really in the context of the significant human rights violations that we see around the world. Moving on, what is our approach to responsible investing? I think we take a look at, we view our role in responsible investing as a comprehensive approach to having impact throughout our investments. And much like you heard Anita talk about Wespath, we do it in some very similar fashions. First of all, is we have a negative screening program to avoid the harms that the Sisters of Mercy in particular care about. We have a component of our program focused on ESG investing because we believe it lines up very well as, with what the Sisters of Mercy are trying to achieve through their ministry with people and in communities today. And then finally, through impact investing, trying to contribute to solutions to the world. But across all of that, we're active owners, as Anita talked about, and we do that through how we engage companies, like many of you, as well as through our proxy voting. Moving on to the next slide. So this is our what we call our 4 pillars in our social responsibility policy. And you see on the left side, basically it's the choices that we make in investing in companies. And like Wespath and many of others of you, we have a set of exclusionary screens focused on company activities, on things like life issues in the Catholic Church, such as abortifacients. We also have screens on weapons, pornography, thermal coal, and oil sands to respond to some environmental concerns. But we also have a set of more aspirational or positive criteria that we ask our managers to implement. And those would be more in the area of what we call, as Anita did mention, environmental, social, and governance standards, and a set of ESG standards that we have and we ask our managers to implement. I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. The bottom left corner is our focus on impact investing, and I'll give you a couple of examples of how we try and take some of the capital of the Sisters of Mercy in our program to respond to environmental and social needs around the globe. On the right side, as we believe very much in active ownership, like I think all of you on this phone do, so engaging companies through resolutions and dialogues, as well as voting of company proxies. So again, I won't spend much time on that today, since I know we're really here to talk about investments. So on to the next page. So lots of numbers on this page. Let me give you a few takeaways here from this page. What we're really showing here is that our negative screens basically apply across our entire equity and fixed income portfolio. Within our equities, we also have ESG managers who we have hired specifically because they integrate environmental, social, and governance factors into the investment selection process. So we have active managers there, but we also have what's called an index fund, like you saw on Anita's slides. Within our index fund, we have done a set of environmental screens on that index fund to try and invest in companies with better environmental records. So that would be one set of takeaways. Basically, 2/3 of our investments are held in ESG investing, while nearly 100% are negatively screened. Anita did a wonderful job showing you a slide on investment returns. I didn't include a slide on investment returns, but I'll share with you our story as well. Our structure is, our governance structure is, we have a social responsibility committee and an investment committee, and they are both committees that report directly to the board, but they have linkages between them. And these linkages mean that when the social responsibility committee wants to adopt a policy that could have investment implications, that policy or that action then goes to the investment committee for its review and endorsement. One action item the investment committee does each year is to take a look at our screens and the impact of both our positive screens and our ESG investing to determine whether or not we have sacrificed any performance, investment performance based upon those screens. And I'm glad to share with you much the same way as Anita has, that we do not see, and our investment committee does not see, an impact from those investment returns. And in fact, they are meeting benchmark returns on a non-screen basis. So that's because the managers are able to implement ESG and negative screening in a way to mitigate any impact on your investment performance. So for those that are out there and try, as Anita says, try and give the message that you sacrifice returns, I'm here also as well to affirm what she said. You really do not. There are investment tools to enable you to build your values into your investments and not give up investment returns. Moving on, if we could then, Chris or Frank. So our impact investing program, I'd like to just take a couple of minutes and talk about that with you as well. We have two different components in our impact investing fund, or the funds that are dedicated and invested specifically to achieve certain environmental and social impacts. The first is what's called Mercy Partnership Fund, which actually has been around now for almost 30 years. In the early days, the Sisters of Mercy communities, and back in those days, there were like 30 of them, they each would put money into it separately, and then that money would be invested together. Now it's an asset allocation, so any organization, including our sponsor, including our ministries that invest in Mercy Investment Services, have part of their investments go into this community investing program. In this particular case, this fund expects high social impact or high environmental impact for its loans, and for that is willing to take a concessionary return, or a return slightly less than a market rate of return. And so we target in this particular fund a rate of return to equal the consumer price index. And we do that so that the principal value of the fund will not go down. We're protecting the principal value. At the same time, we're achieving what we believe to be a high set of environmental and social impacts. And in fact, we do have impact reports and analyses that we do each year and report to governance on the impacts our investments have received in communities and dealing with the environment. The other impact investing program we have is our Environmental Solutions Fund, which is more of a market rate approach to investing, but really focused on sustainable solutions to climate change, access to waters, sustainable agriculture. If you go on to the next slide, I'll have a little bit of information about each one of these programs. So again, here, Mercy Partnership Fund, this is a global fund. Our thematic focuses here are related to a special concern for women, alleviation of poverty with a special focus here in the United States on areas of persistent poverty, particularly in the southern United States, and on increasing access to clean energy and clean water. We could go on to the next slide on the Environmental Solutions Fund. We have now committed $80 million for solar and wind projects that are here in the United States, as well as Asia and Africa, and just recently did an interesting water investment in the Asian area as well. So this was in part a response that our Social Responsibility Committee requested of our investment committee to basically in 2014, as we were considering the climate change impacts in our investment program, really asking the investment committee to find ways to invest, to expand the capacity of clean and renewable energy and sources of water. And so this in many ways is part of a climate change strategy that the program did adopt beginning in 2014. And I think I have a slide on that a bit later. In fact, I do. Here it is. This is our statement on climate change. And it's available on our website, but really does talk about a multi-pronged approach that we've implemented across the portfolio, focused first on engaging companies, excluding investments in thermal coal and oil sands, and with a real commitment then to also invest in energy solutions, which we've just talked about. But the other part of that is also to look at our own carbon consumption. And I think that's something that we're still challenged with as an organization, is we recognize investments are not the sole answer to dealing with climate change. You have to deal with climate change first and foremost in terms of how we're all using energy in our everyday lives. And so we we're trying to figure this out. So we also did a carbon footprint of our portfolio back in 2015 because we wanted to understand what companies in our portfolio were generating the highest emissions. Now, I'll share with you that a carbon footprint should not be viewed as the answer to all issues related to climate change. It is only one tool of many to use. But we did do basically a baseline back in 2015 and found that our emissions were 14% less than the benchmark emissions at that time. Have made some changes in what I talked about before in terms of that environmental tilt in our index funds. And now the companies we own in our investment program, in terms of at least the global equity program, generate 24% fewer emissions than the benchmark. So again, another tool to help you look at how your investments are having environmental impacts. So moving on. Just briefly on engagements, you see here basically the sort of a layering or a showing of where we focus our efforts in engaging companies, and obviously a lot of focus in the middle on environmental sustainability, as I'm sure many of you are doing as well. We're currently engaging about 150 companies. We're able to do that because we have a team of about 6 full-time equivalents that help us engage these companies, along with all of you. So moving on, if I could, to the next slide. You know, our view within the Sisters of Mercy is engaging companies is one of the many advocacy levers that they have. And you see here, the Sisters of Mercy through our justice team also engage at the federal and state advocacy levels. We also have an office at the United Nations. We have Sisters of Mercy ministering on the grounds, and then there's the investment program. In our view, and I think the last 5 years probably is a good analogy for this, at any one time, any one of these levers will be successful. So keeping effort on all of these levers is important because at any one time, one of the levers can lead you to success, or one of them can, you know, basically put you a bit behind, like we might be in public policy advocacy in Washington right now, given some changes. So we think our work with companies is really important to support this overall advocacy agenda of the Sisters of Mercy. And then finally, the last slide, you know, our success in this work is through our collaboration with all of you and with the other organizations that we relate to. And you see a number of them listed here. There are many others, including all the coalitions for responsible investment that we could add on here as well. We're successful in this work because we come together to do the work. So I'll stop now and see, and as well to see what kind of questions you might have for us. I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Thank you, Frank, for unmuting me. Thank you, Susan, for that walkthrough of your work. So now we've heard a bit from both Susan and Anita about the approach that that both Wespath and Mercy have to socially responsible investing. Admittedly, you know, there's a larger team probably than many of us members experience. But maybe I'll let you ask members if they have any questions. I think you can just unmute yourself, probably.
Yeah, so everyone is on mute, but you can unmute yourself if you have a question. Maybe
If you
while
move your
others...
mouse to the lower left-hand corner, you can click unmute or mute.
Right. While they're getting teed up, maybe I'll start our discussion. Maybe for Anita. Anita, in your avoid section of or pillar of your program, you included some exclusions associated with human rights. Can you expound a little bit on that?
Sure. So we have always believed that sustainability issues can create so much risk that it impacts financial performance. And so we have put that into our statement of administrative investment policy, and then we can develop a guideline to help us decide what to do when we find such a situation. And human rights is one of the areas where we have found that we believe that there can be so much risk involved that companies cannot operate there without financial risk. So we have developed a guideline, and again, we have this on our website as well. If anyone's interested, I can always provide the link to that. And it focuses on high-risk areas. And so those are places where the risk is so great, conflict is so great. And in fact, we use the Freedom House. Freedom House puts out a worst of the worst list in terms of human rights. And any country that is on that worst of the worst list, we will exclude. And so if we see a company has operations there, we'll look at the nature of their operations. So is it just a retail presence, or are they doing something that's actually helping to exacerbate the human rights concerns? We'll also look at the percentage of revenue that is at risk, because if it is just a small percentage of the company's revenue, then perhaps that doesn't create the financial risk that we're concerned about. And then we also will investigate whether the company has done anything to mitigate that risk. So we want to know if management is aware of the risks and if they're doing anything to mitigate that. And then in addition to the countries, we recognize that sometimes conflict is over a piece of disputed land, and there may be military occupations. And so we will also include, we have around 9 areas in the world that are under military occupation that we also look at under the human rights guideline. And so as a result of that, then we will make a decision on whether to engage the company in dialogue, whether to exclude it from the portfolio, or whether to take no action.
Thank you.
I have a question related to active engagement with investing in index funds or passive type investments. Anita or Susan, either one, how do you actively engage when you're an investment tool or investment portfolio includes index funds?
May I ask a question? Are these funds separately managed, or are they commingled together so that you don't own stock in the companies, but you own an interest in the fund?
It's a mutual fund.
The mutual fund. So what we do, we own ours separately. So but in the case of if you own funds in a mutual fund, and so you only have the interest in the mutual fund, what we will do is we will purchase through an advocacy account a certain minimum number of shares for companies that we want to engage, that we've identified that are in that index fund, for example, but are creating environmental or social or governance issues that are part of our engagement plan. So we do that in order to be able to assure that we can meet the SEC filing requirements of continuous ownership for 1 year of a particular minimum amount. And we do that also so that if there's some change in the investment ownership, because we have these separate accounts, so we would proactively do that, buy a certain minimum amount and put it in a fund so we can control the ownership of that. And I don't know, Anita, anything else that you want to add, any other ideas you have on how to do that? You could also engage the mutual fund. I guess that would be the other thing that I would say too. So, but go ahead, Anita.
No, actually, that's just what I was going to say, Susan, is you might engage the fund, because there are some investors like Wespath or Mercy that are having conversations with BlackRock or Vanguard or Fidelity. But it always helps if they know that there's client interest. That helps support those kind of top level engagements.
And the other thing that I recommend that you do is take a look at the proxy voting records of your managers, your index managers that basically are published about in August of every year. Now there has been some improvement, particularly on the environmental side, over the past couple of years of these index managers and how they vote. But it really is an important question that they're investing these, they're holding these investments on behalf of you. That's another place to give them input on how you would like to see your interests voted on those shares. So that would be good constructive feedback to them.
Thanks, Anita and Susan. Oh, can you move us forward 2 slides just so that we're also showing the contact information for both Anita and Susan? Maybe taking up a question. I might be preempting somebody else who's thinking this, but on this webinar, more than 2/3 of the participants actually are women, and probably at least half of that number are religious sisters. And I see that, Susan, you all are part of the 30% coalition.
Yep.
So is
Anita, so is Wespath.
Well, can you both maybe share a little bit of your own thinking around how, when selecting advisors and managers and like, how race and gender factor into your thinking on that?
We do have criteria as we are looking at hiring new managers in terms of what the presence of women and diverse members are in their investment team, as well as leadership. And so carrying forward very much our commitment to diversity. The one thing I would encourage on is to take a look at your proxy voting guidelines to see whether you're taking board diversity into consideration as you're voting for board members. So a little bit different slant on that, but ISS's new Catholic voting guideline, I know sets up, if the board will not be 30% diverse, it will withhold votes. That's something new. We've been voting that way for years, given our commitment to diversity and board diversity. So Anita?
Also, we do the proxy voting, so we have the 30% guideline as well. But in terms of our investment managers, in our policy, in our investment policy, we do have what we call an emerging manager program, and that's women and minority-owned firms. And the way that we approach it is, if all else is equal, so if they are a finalist and everything else, that performance, fees, everything else that we look at are competitive, then we will give preference to the women or minority-owned firm.
Thank you. Given that you also mentioned the proxy voting, I know that a number of our members, Sister Ruth Schaff, for instance, was talking about how she's besieged with all the proxies that she's voting right now.
Time of year.
Members actually still do that themselves, but it's worth mentioning at least that there are others out there in services that will do that. Our collaborators, the Tri-State Coalition for Responsible Investment, will do that for a fee. ISS, as Susan mentioned, will do that. Michael Passoff of Proxy Impact also, I know, does that. Any thoughts or suggestions, at least regarding, because like I know ISS has a whole series of options that one could pick from. Any experience you have or background on how to think about how the proxies get voted and to assure that they're voted in coherence with our views?
Well, I'll start on this one. We have customized proxy voting guidelines, and we have Glass Lewis as our vendor. We do also get some research from ISS. Our guidelines are on our website, and we also disclose our votes on our website. Where possible, we'll try to vote our proxies early enough that they can get posted so that if anyone wants to see how we're planning to vote, it's available. We're not always successful, especially in the height of proxy season when there are so many coming in. But we do try to get that information out there, or at least you could look at last year's ballot if that's something that would be helpful.
What I would add, very much like Anita, we do post our votes as well. Although Anita, I give you kudos if you can post them early. I give you big kudos on that. But our proxy voting guidelines, ISS is our proxy voting vendor. And we have a set of customized guidelines that sit on top of their Catholic voting guidelines. I would encourage you, if you don't use the ISS, or excuse me, the ICCR proxy book, that's a tool for you to use to find what resolutions to vote in support of, as well as You Sow produces a proxy preview book. All of those are resources that are available to you on the web, or certainly I would think Frank and Christopher can forward some of them your way to help you take a look at which resolutions that you want to make sure that you're supporting.
Thank you. Other questions from participants on the webinar?
So Chris, I have to just say, because I'm not on the phone often with other congregation of women religious from Wisconsin, as you said that there are some. So the health system that I was on the board of was the Franciscan Sisters of Christian Charity health system based up in Manitowoc. Wisconsin. And so I'm not sure that any of them are on the phone today, but I appreciated my years of ministering up there. And they have both colleges as well as healthcare. They have a college as well as healthcare. So I miss my visits up to Manitowoc, I have to be honest. They're a great group of ladies.
It's a beautiful part of the country, although 2 days ago we were snowed upon. So
I saw that. I have two of my colleagues on the Mercy team are up in the Appleton area. So yes.
yeah,
Not to interrupt this conversation, but let me.
I diverted. Forgive me, Frank.
No problem. Both our speakers, that there's still a myth out there on fiduciary responsibility, and I think the current administration has not helped raising clarity on that. But can either of you or both of you comment, because I know that some of investment committees still carry this myth of using ESG criteria is not valid for a fiduciary, according to, because many of our members have funds that do that may be covered by various regulations around this. Can you guys speak to that?
Anita, do you want to kick it off? Because I know you're very clear about your fiduciary duty and your policies.
I can, but Susan, I think it would also be valuable to hear from you because you have such great legal insights into this. So I'll talk about it more from just kind of how we administer the plan. And we have similar, Susan was talking about how they have the two committees, Social Responsibility Committee and Investment Committee, that have to work together. We're the same. At our board, we have a UMC Principles Committee, which looks at how we adhere to the social principles of the church. But we also have a fiduciary committee. And that fiduciary committee oversees everything that we do in order to make sure that we are adhering to our fiduciary duty. And they're pretty tough on us. So there's no giving us an easy pass because we're affiliated with the church. So we adhere very highly to the fiduciary duty. We are exempt from SEC regulation. However, we try to manage our program as if we weren't. So we try to adhere to that highest standard. And, I've tried to weave into my comments today kind of that fiduciary duty and our approach to it. Sometimes that's not popular because there are those within the church who say, but don't you understand we should be doing X, and X relates to a particular social issue. But, we also recognize that for any social issue you want to name, we've got other participants who would say, no, you should be doing Z on this. And what we find is that by adhering to our fiduciary duty, it really keeps us in that place where we need to be so we don't stray too far into letting our program be influenced by social issues.
And I'll just follow up on this and say there's been a number of legal opinions that have been issued over the years that do validate that fiduciary duty is met when you integrate in fact, calls on investors that they should be addressing and integrating issues of the environmental, social, and governance into their investment decision-making process. So that is affirmed. I think it's important to know that, as Anita says and Frank say, there's in fact, it was just in today's email feeds that President Trump has asked the Department of Labor to revisit the guidance from the Department of Labor on ERISA plans. But I think if you sort of step back and you look at environmental, social, and governance factors, what those really are is they very much can be investment risks to the companies that you hold in your portfolio. So we are long-term investors, and we're relying on our investment program to be there to support our sisters and our ministries over the long term. And so our view is that these factors are material and can have a material impact on performance. And so it's very much consistent with your responsibility and duty to achieve a reasonable rate of return, as well as address the issues, in our case, that the Sisters of Mercy are concerned about. And if you need citations on that, I'm sure I can find those and drag those out for you all on the fiduciary duty and the legal opinions. Frank, if anybody wants those, or Chris, if anybody wants those, let me know.
Okay.
No, I think I'll take you up on that. I do have materials, but I think it's a worthwhile blog topic.
Question for Anita on the lending program. I'm just wondering, do you administer that in-house, or do you align yourselves with an outside advisor?
We do run that program in-house. In fact, it's the only part of our investment program that we do manage internally. So our team works with a number of third-party intermediaries that they've worked with over the years to help find out where the deals are happening and get themselves involved in the deal flow.
Thank you.
Maybe asking a question in some ways to some of the members here present, especially the ones who've been reviewing their policies and revising them. Have you found a particular learning as you've undertaken that, or something that kind of surprised you, or something that would be for the good of the other members present that you'd want to share with this group? Or a struggle, something you're trying to move forward that you just can't seem to get the rest of the tribe to agree with. Well, while people are considering that, Frank, maybe
Judy, I unmuted you, not to put you on the spot, but I know your community has been reviewing your investment policy. We worked with you a little bit on that. Can you share a little bit of your journey with your colleagues? Sorry to tee you up.
We've been working, since October to get integration of our values into some of our investment policies that would be more specific with, diversity in the portfolio. So we're at the point we've had help with a financial consultant, and we've had a draft that we worked with. And then we made it so that our goals, our values would be integrated into that at this point, and identifying some of the issues that we're focused on right now for doing shareholder action. So we're taking that, we've had a first revision, and we're looking at presenting that to the people that would be reviewing this and accepting this, working with this. So we feel we're making progress, and you helped us a lot with that, but there are things today I thought, okay, we need to put that on the table and see what can we do more to be more clear about some of those things. So I appreciate today a lot what's being provided for us. And I have to keep remembering that I'm a volunteer to do this with no background at all. And I'm just very appreciative of those of you who have done this for some time. And I think it's really important for us, and we want to be involved that way with our resources. So I'm learning a lot. We will try to do what we can. When I hear the amounts of funds you must be working with compared to us, that you need 6 people to do this, I'm going, oh my gosh. So we can with the small committee we have to do this, who are all mostly people either retired or in full-time ministry. So it's a challenge, but I'm energized by what's being presented to us, that we can move forward with this and be responsible for the fiduciary part, but also be in using our funds in a way that address these issues that we want to have a voice at.
Hey, Frank, can I address the 6-person comment just for a minute? Because I don't want you to think that you can't do this work without a team of 6 people. That's not the case. We have more people on our shareholder advocacy team than some organizations do, because we help other organizations with shareholder advocacy. We're sort of like, if you will, outsource staffing to other organizations. And that's why our team is larger than maybe some others would have. But please don't ever think that you can't make a meaningful impact in this area with a much smaller staff, because you can.
Yeah, let me.
And with one final on that, in the materials that I presented, there was a slide that had a list of questions. And, as you think about this, you may find that helpful if you go back and just kind of look at those questions and either present them as is or use them to, amend them and tailor them to your own specific situation. I hope that's a resource that could be helpful.
Yes, I noted that on my notes that when I look back at that. So thank you.
I should have introduced Sister Judy Sinwell, is with the Sisters of St. Francis in Dubuque, Iowa. So sorry, Judy, but thank you for sharing. I think one thing that is important, and again, I want others to jump in, this feeling of, that Judy shared, I'm not an expert, I don't have a PhD in economics. I'm not from Wall Street. I don't think that's the criteria or the prerequisite needed for this work. I think the prerequisite needed is that you have a passion for people, that you want to get involved and make a difference, that you have a pulse on your community's priorities, and that you have a willingness to learn. I think I have been surprised in my introduction. I've been at this. Mike Crosby recruited me a few years ago, but I'm amazed at the impact that our members have had on the management. Sometimes you don't realize it in these dialogues when companies are so polished with their talking points, but trust me, they go back and they dwell on what is said, and they do change their behavior. And so that's just a bid to encourage our members to don't be shy. You haven't been shy throughout your careers. And so this is not an area to shy away from.
And maybe just to kind of help close it out here, because we're at our finishing time. Even today's New York Times has a significant article that begins with an interaction between Father Mike Crosby and Rex Tillerson, then CEO of ExxonMobil, that especially the faith-based shareholders then bring something distinct to the conversation with the corporations that's really vital and important for the good of the most vulnerable and of the world. And so your questions, your concerns, it's the challenge of how to articulate that and bring that into those other places that need to hear your voice. Frank, if you'll move us back one slide for just a moment. After this webinar, I'm going to send both an evaluation. I'll also send some links to some tools. Two things that we recommend and find really helpful are these kinds of guides that come from US CIF for financial advisors and for money managers. And I'll also send some links to some of the things that both Anita and Susan referred to, as well as the slides from this webinar. So you'll have those available to you. On behalf of our members and all those who participate in this webinar and the ones who will see it afterwards online, we really do want to thank Susan and Anita for joining us today. Anita has helped us in a number of instances with service to our members today on the webinar. And Susan and Mercy have also been very generous. On our health webinar, you may recall, Donna Meyer was with us, and we collaborate routinely with both Wespath and with Mercy Investment Services. And thank you as well to all of our members who are here today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.